So, hello and welcome to another podcast from the Engineering Department at Durham University. As always, my name is Chloe, and today we're joined by Sam, who's been my colleague in running the social media pages since the start of this year, and who is now a Durham graduate. How are you doing, Sam?
I'm doing increasingly well, thank you. I got my results on Monday, and wouldn't have necessarily said I was doing this well before then, but I got some results that I was very happy with, as I think most of my colleagues in engineering. So feeling a little bit boosted after that. And ready to enter the big wide world, which is a scary prospect for sure.
I'm so glad you got the results you were after. So today we're hoping to talk a bit about your experiences studying engineering at Durham, as well as a bit about your plans sort of now you've graduated. So to start with, how have you found your time in Durham, and what have been some of your favourite memories?
If I were to pick out a few, I think a lot of them do come from my college. So I'm Cuff, so hello any Cuff listeners out there. One of the biggest colleges in Durham, of course, so hopefully we'll have a few in there. I think I've really enjoyed the collegiate life at Durham. I think that's something that sets student life at Durham apart. I think it's, if I talk to a lot of my friends from other universities, they have friends pretty much exclusively on their course, and of course I'm friends with many engineers as well. You know, I love the engineering department, but I think something that I've come away from Durham feeling, and I think a lot of the compliments I get when I talk to people about what I was like before university and what I'm like now, it was awful before, frankly, is that I'm surrounded now by such a diverse group of people and such a diverse group of opinions that brings, not just people from different countries and backgrounds, but also with people with different specializations, whereas if I was just hanging around with just engineers, maybe I wouldn't be so well versed in current affairs and politics as I have been throughout socializing in my college. So if I were to pick out a few things at college that I've really enjoyed, I think we'd have to be focusing on, I'm more of a college day than a college ball kind of person. As much as I do enjoy wearing a suit, I think when I can dress down, have a bit of fun with live music as well. I've always loved live music. Then that always suits me absolutely down to the T. And then if we're talking about best memories in engineering, I've been very lucky to have some real highlights there. So goodness me, is it first year or second now? My memory is failing me, but when you do the design challenge, and we had to design a small robot that could climb up the inside of a pipe, detect the top and come back down again. We were really lucky to, I won't lie, I can say this now because I've graduated, we completely fluked our way through that. We had a very basic design, and that really was purely the simplicity of the design. We were much less ambitious than I think a lot of the other projects were, and we were basically the only one that worked. It didn't matter how quickly we did it because we were the only one that worked. We won on the day, and that piece of coursework was linked to the IMechE team design challenge. So as the winners from Durham, we went over to compete first at Northumbria University, where exactly the same thing happened. We were pretty much the only one that worked. We fluked our way through. We made a few tweaks to the design. We were able to buy some slightly more powerful motors, of course, because when we were competing against other universities, Durham's pockets, get a little bit deeper. Oliver Vogt gets the credit card out and the magic starts happening. But the design fundamentally didn't change too much. And it was at that event, which again, we won sort of by default, very luckily, that we had some talks on what makes design. And we also got more of a feel from where the design brief had come from. So this was effectively a small robot that could climb up and down the inside of a pipe. And much like drones are used to inspect bridges, which is a bit of a classic answer that everyone used to how modern technologies can be integrated with engineering. The inspection of pipes is actually, if anything, even more useful for drones to do because there are structures which people can't fit inside. So if you were to attach a small camera, sorry, not drone, a GoPro or something with a light, then of course you could inspect inside of structures like that, which is particularly important. Not even pipes that necessarily carry anything, but tubular steel members on bridges, you could send it down. And I think with that focus of why we were building this design, that really motivated not just me, but the rest of my team to go away, have a think about how to make something that was really successful. So previously it was all spring controlled, and springs are great. They give you a lot of flexibility, but less precision. Whereas if we could physically you know, we were sort of using the springs to avoid being precise with the measurements because it just sort of pull everything into roughly the right shape. We went away, we made precise measurements, and we made a much more a design which was just much more precise. And went away, took that down to London, where all of the regional winners compete. I think Oliver even managed to bag us some Durham University shirts that were left over from the open day, so we looked the part as well, which was nice. Went down there, competed, and it was us against a team from, goodness me, I'm sure it's on my team to remember, like, I want to say it was Birmingham University, but apologies if I get that wrong, who had designed this absolutely crazy design. And they'd very much taken the opposite approach to what we had done. We had focused on the brief, focused on exactly what this thing was going to be used for, and used that to inspire our design. They had done what I think a lot of engineers like to do, which is where they look at the brief and they think, how can we find a loophole in this? How can we make something that would probably be completely useless to put a camera drone on, but technically speaking is legal, and that, you know, effectively makes us faster? And they'd achieved that by powering their robot with carbon dioxide canisters, which what I can only describe as a devil's trident would spring load up into the base of, detonate the carbon dioxide, and launch it up the tube like a rocket. So it was us in the final. It was very much a case of, if their design worked, we would have been floored and we would have absolutely lost. We'd beaten another in like semi-finals and stuff. We'd beaten a few designs that were similar to ours, so we'd finally won some on the clock rather than just, oh, theirs has fallen out the tube, which had very much been the case previously. And it was us versus them in the final, and their trident fires upwards. It's making its way up to the tube, and the judges are watching it very carefully, and it doesn't quite hit the top of the tube. It just runs out of gas, and we're playing the winners as a result. And I've still got that little trophy in my room. You know, that means a huge amount to me. And also shows just how interdisciplinary student life is at Durham. You know, that was a Institution of Mechanical Engineers trophy. I'm now a member of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and I work for them, and will be working for them next year. So I think another big advantage of Durham, that is that I've gone away and competed as a mechanical engineer. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm in love with mechanical engineering, doesn't necessarily mean that I'm even that good at it. But the fact that the Durham course rounds you in that sense has been a huge advantage for sure.
Yeah, no, I remember doing that as well last year. So it was a first year project, and they normally give you sort of 4 different tasks from the IMechE that you'll be assigned, and you do it over the course of a week. And yeah, it's normally either a really fun week out of academic sort of stuff, or like a week of hell if you just can't get it to work.
One of the two, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's a really good chance to get a break from the academic stuff, definitely. So can you tell us which stream in engineering you chose, Sam, and why you picked those modules?
Yes, so as I briefly mentioned with advance there, civil's me. I mainly picked that because I am a big believer, and I'm sure a lot of engineering academics would go against me when I say this, that nowadays, when everything is so computerized, a lot of the skill in engineering doesn't necessarily come from being good at the number crunching, good at the mathematics. It comes from the problem solving and having a very logical mind. And this isn't necessarily the case, and I wouldn't necessarily let this push anyone towards civil. But as a naive second year who didn't do as much research about the different modules as perhaps I should have done, it looked to me, just mainly based off, you know, the information that was available online at the time, that the civil course would be the least mathematical, involve the least crunching of the numbers, and which is not something I was ever particularly good at. You know, to get my A star to come into Durham, that wasn't in maths, I'll tell you for that. So I thought it was just playing to my strengths. You know, at the time, I liked all sorts of engineering. I'm really into my F1, so that mechanical engineering fascinates me for that reason. Electronic engineering, I did a coding module in first year. I've always really enjoyed the coding side of things, so that drew me to there. And civil engineering, you know, is difficult not to like because it's just all around you. You know, everyone knows a bit of civil engineering. So it wasn't so much a passion for one of them. It was more of a tactical, what will I be best at decision. And then since then, I think a passion has really grown for civil engineering, especially working in it, which is very exciting.
That's good. And have you had any sort of favourite modules or favourite parts of the course over the last 4 years?
That's a very good question. I think I would have to say environment. This is very specific. third year civil students out there, I'm sure will agree with me that environmental engineering is something that is an absolutely awesome module. If you take materials, which all third years do, you get a little flavour of it when you do Karen Johnson's sustainability lectures. It has a decent amount of overlap with that module, and it's kind of like the little taster that, you know, all the other engineers get. But we get a whole module in it, which is awesome. And it's taught in the style of 2-hour lectures, half as often, which I really, really like. You can really get your teeth into it. It's much more of an open discourse rather than you're just being fed information, which I know some people really like. And as much as I think everything at Durham is taught really well, I think that one stood out to me as particularly being taught excellently.
Looking forward to it. And as someone who's had experience studying the normal way, kind of pre-COVID, how have you found studying online in comparison? And is there anything you would sort of say to fellow students in lower years who maybe haven't had the chance to have any in-person teaching yet?
I think it definitely has its advantages, purely in the time sense. You're not commuting to and from, and you know, engineering is all cameras off, so you have to, you know, make sure you look nice before you go out there. You even have to have a shower if you don't want to. And I think a lot of people see a lot of benefits in that. Some people might even be sad when in-life person lectures come back. But what I would say to those people is that I think most of the advantages of online lectures don't necessarily come from an academic point of view. It often comes from a personal point of view where you just have more time in your day, it can be a bit easy. But from a purely academic sense, I don't think you can beat having an academic in front of you and seeing the cogs turning in their brain as they explain something, because then you're not, which is so difficult to understand over camera, because then you're not just hearing what they're saying, you're almost hearing what they're thinking. You know, you're understanding how they're coming to the conclusion as you say it, because by the time you get to degree level engineering, I'm sure any of the lecturers wouldn't mind admitting that they're having to relearn stuff as they teach it because it's so advanced. I mean, I'm sure there are certain lecturers out there who know their entire course like the back of their hand and could pick any of it up at any time. But I think they're probably in the minority, and a lot of the lecturers are having to, you know, learn stuff in the weeks leading up to a lecture to make sure they absolutely have it on point to teach it to us, which is something we're very lucky to have at Durham. And if anything, it's those lecturers, weirdly, that I end up learning most from, because I think a lot of people would presume that the better a lecturer understands the content, the better they'll be able to teach it. But often I find if the lecturer is sort of learning along with us, because you're watching someone learn it, you're almost, you know, you're being given the perfect way to do it. You know, you're being given all of the tools. I think you can make a comparison with languages students. I've often heard prefer to learn off English native speakers than not English native speakers, prefer to learn off English lecturers than native speakers, apart from, of course, in things like speaking, where it's really, really useful to get that accent across. And the way I've had it explained to me is purely because if I was teaching someone English, personally, I would really struggle because I never had to learn English. You know, I as old as I can remember, I already knew it. I don't remember all the little tips and tricks of how to remember how to conjugate verbs. And I think that sort of thing doesn't just apply to engineering. You know, when you can have that lecture in front of you face to face, and you can have that open discourse, and you can go up to them at the end of the lecture and say, you said this, how did you get from there to there? How did you get to A to D without doing B and C in the middle and stuff like that? And that is something that is very difficult to do over a Zoom class. It's a bit more awkward to press the raise hand button and ask a question than it is just to stroll up to the desk at the end. And that's something that I don't think you can ever replace.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think there's that bit extra interaction when you're in the lecture hall. And also just the people around you as well, they're always there to help you as well. So yeah, it's much more social, and there's just something that bit better, I think, about having in-person teaching. Which hopefully anyone who hasn't yet had the chance to experience it will get to experience come October.
Fingers crossed, yeah, fingers crossed, that's the hope.
So moving away from the academic side of uni life, what extracurricular activities did you get involved with throughout your time at Durham?
So extracurricular for me was mainly focused not necessarily on sports and societies, but actually focused at my part-time job at the bar. It's almost weird to call that extracurricular, but because I was social sec the entire time I was there, you know, I came to university not the most extroverted person, which I think people watching this podcast will probably be like, yeah, right. But yeah, I have really come out of my shell a lot at university, and I think organising things like socials, having the confidence to chuck out some drunk fresher at the bar who clearly needs to be walked home, and even just walking up to people and asking them what they want to drink when it's been table service recently. I think developing all of those soft skills are honestly the biggest extracurricular gains I've had whilst in university. And then purely from a sporting sense, I've really enjoyed my running here. So I'm not the most coordinated person, but where I think when you're running, it's often the least coordinated runners that end up going the fastest. If anyone's watching the Olympics, I'm sure will agree with me there in Tokyo this summer. So yeah, I've always enjoyed my running, and obviously was very, very blessed that in the first lockdown, pretty much a year ago, everyone in the country became a runner. So it was nice to see everyone else on the street joining me. I didn't get asked so many questions like what you're running away from. It became a bit more of a normal thing for everyone else to be out jogging. So yeah, something the country's really fallen in love with. And I've always particularly liked my park runs. Anyone who's done a 5K park run, and if you haven't, give it a Google. They're absolutely brilliant. The one in Durham City is one of the nicest courses in the whole country. And it's a completely free 5-kilometre race that most college running clubs will take you along to and show you how to sign up. And they happen every Saturday morning. So would thoroughly encourage people to get involved in them. I believe the first ones will be starting back up. People around now, people and students staying over summer, and obviously they'll be running through the winter as well for people coming next year, or indeed freshers who are listening to the podcast and prospective students who are looking to join us in September. So yeah, big fan of parkrun. I believe Professor Chris Groves is a park runner, so you'll see him there. Feel free to ask him questions about your problem sheets as you are jogging your way around. I'm sure he'll love that. But yeah, no, running's my main sport.
Yeah, and leading on probably really nicely from that one, actually, do you have any tips for balancing kind of study, social life, relaxing?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and I think it surprises me when I hear it, because in my mind, the two complement each other so well that I very much struggle to study without having my exercise and my social extracurricular. You know, I forget the name of the theory, but there is a scientific theory that if you work for 4 hours in a row, you will be significantly less productive than someone who works for an hour, takes half an hour break, works for an hour, takes half an hour break, and repeats that throughout the process. And I really stand by that. If I ever hit a bit of a writer's block doing a summative, or people out there doing personal statements, maybe stuff like that, it sounds counterintuitive, but if I go for a run and come back, I'm more energized and have more new ideas, because especially for me, I'm very lucky to have this while running. I think I'm sure anyone who does things like swimming or cycling or any other solitary sports will very much relate to the fact that there are very, very few times in your life when you have a completely clear mind just to kind of think whatever you like, maybe a bit of music, headphones and stuff like that. I think people often describe it as shower thoughts, because I guess people who aren't into those sort of exercises, the only time they have that sort of solitary time is in the shower, I guess. But those sort of shower thoughts, those little light bulb moments, are what I get a lot when I'm running. And so I would say that, it really, really complements my work. As for someone who's had a part-time job at uni, again, I would encourage people who are taking up part-time jobs to lean towards things like bar work or restauranting, which is mainly evening focused. I think it can be quite difficult if you're working in retail to balance a job that is as heavy as engineering with study. It can be done. There are people out there who have done it, and I absolutely applaud them, but I'm not as hardworking as them. I wish I was. So yeah, having that balance in the evening is that, again, it complements each other really well. It's better than not having the social stuff at all, because if I've just finished handed a summative, handed it at 2 p.m. like I normally would, there's no way I would normally go out and socialise. But if I check my diary and see, got a bar shift, can't relax this evening after my hand, and I'm like, well, actually that's quite good, because all I'd have done otherwise is just sat and watch Netflix and just vegetated. Whereas if I actually have this bar shift, I'm forced to socialise, I'm forced to get out there and actually enjoy the fact that I have achieved something great in handing in that summative. It puts you in social situations that I wouldn't necessarily have the confidence to put myself in. And I think that is extremely beneficial, especially when you're studying, just to put your mind on something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important obviously particularly with the year we've had. I think it's so important just to get that social interaction, whether that is through extracurricular or work, as you say. Yeah, it's really important to be able to balance that with the study.
Completely
And
agree.
and so since finishing your final year, have you been up to anything recently?
Yes, I haven't really had a moment's rest, I must admit. So let me see, we finished on June the 4th. And what I've always really liked doing, and what you get the most fantastic opportunities to do at this time of year, is and it's a really important part of student life at Durham, I think, is you get to, you've made all of these amazing friends, which is again, so much easier to do at somewhere like Durham, because I don't know about other colleges, but certainly at Cath, it very much feels like we're almost forced to socialise at times. And you're forced to make all of these great friends across so many different disciplines. And then you do that all in maybe first term. And then by the time you get to third term is when people start inviting their parents up. And I've always loved meeting parents, because it's kind of like watching like a behind the scenes documentary to your favourite film. You get to see like, oh yeah, that's where he got that from. That's why he's a bit like that. That's where that story's come from. And I find that really, really fascinating. So loads of people have their parents up in Durham. And in a COVID secure way, I've been getting to know all of them, which is lovely. And one of my closest friends, who I've lived with pretty much throughout all my time at Durham, I went over to Manchester, where he's from, to visit his family as well. And that was a really special trip. As much as I love Durham, it is nice to go to a city where there are occasionally buildings taller than 4 or 5 stories that aren't just the cathedral. And I know a lot of students get that from going to Newcastle, which I would really encourage any freshers who are out there listening. If you didn't get the chance to go to Newcastle this much because of the pandemic, because trains can be quite intimidating and stuff when you're all masked up, please, I implore you to make the most of Newcastle next summer. The university, anyone who's been following our Instagram will know how many historical links our university has to Newcastle University. Newcastle and Durham are, for want of a better word, twin cities, especially in an education way. So go up there, enjoy it, because it is your city as well. The Newcastle and Durham share so much, but also complement each other so much, and they have so many different things. So yeah, get out there, get amongst it. And if I was to tell someone an ideal day out in Newcastle for post-exams life, I would encourage you, if you've got a provisional driving license, to spend all day going around on the scooters, because that's a really cost-effective way to get around, much more fun than the metro as well. I would encourage you, obviously, to go to the 2 squares and have a look. There's lots of good shopping to be done in both of those. And for an activity, I would recommend one of the escape rooms. Newcastle has some really, really good escape rooms. So a nice chance to test your mind on something that isn't quite engineering. And I've done a couple of those escape rooms in Newcastle up in post-exams, and they have been really, really good fun. Especially, with a big group of friends who all have an opinion. And I don't be discouraged if you think an escape room will lead to an argument. That makes a good escape room. You want to be holding one key in one hand, 3 keys in the other hand, on trying to force it into a lock that your friend is holding upside down and back to front. It's properly funny, and you laugh about it all afterwards, hopefully. But there's also one in Durham as well. There's an escape from Durham on the Bailey. I did both of those in first year, and they're a good bunch. So yeah, anyone looking around for something to do can thoroughly encourage that.
Absolutely. And what are your plans for the coming months? So I know you've got a grad job lined up. Can you tell us a bit about what you'll be doing with that?
So that graduate job is down at Gatwick Airport. So I was put in contact with Costain via the Institute of Engineers, which I've done a few bits of work for over the years. And then, yes, we're based down in Gatwick as a site engineer. So site engineering, for anyone who doesn't know, there are probably site engineers who really disagree with this definition, but how I've had it best explained to me is that you have the design engineers, which is a very popular career option people coming off the Durham course often work in, maybe, for example, the Newcastle office at Arup or something like that, where there are lots based in London, and indeed all over the country as well. You have all of those people, and you have the labourers out on site who are actually physically constructing, because unlike in mechanical or electronic engineering, it's very difficult to automate civil engineering. You can't really have a factory that builds a skyscraper. I know there are actually a few examples of that in the Middle East where that is being tested, but it's certainly not commonplace in this country yet. So it's quite a unique situation in which there isn't much of a discourse between the design office and the labourers out on site. They will send people out of the design office if it's close by to come and inspect the site, but there will rarely, at least from my experience, be conversation between the two parties. The site engineers are kind of there to facilitate that, to speak to the labourers in a way that they understand what's going on, converting what is called a works package plan, which comes down from the design team into a flow chart, like a form of work. So we see this design and we say, okay, this is the order in which you want it to be built. This is how we're going to make that healthy and safe on site, and actually be built in a way that all of the labourers will be able to understand. So it's an interesting job, in which case you are office based, but that office will not be in some glass tower somewhere. That will be most likely in some sort of porter cabin on a building site, which is quite exciting. You get a bit more of an interesting view out your window, concrete being poured or cranes being put up and taken down, and all of that fun. And it's a job that I've also done for the last 2 summers. So as soon as I committed to civil engineering, through working with the ICE, through their Quest scheme, I would encourage anyone out there who's a prospective engineer to Google the ICE's Quest scheme. It's very lucrative. They sponsor you very well if they like you. And of course, you gain an unbelievable amount of information as well. It's not just about money. So yeah, and it was working as site engineer down at Gatwick Airport, specifically working on the new train station. So anyone who has taken the Gatwick Express recently knows that the station up in London is, of course, Victoria, very well connected and works very well. The station down in Gatwick, less so, getting a little bit tired now. So that is being redone currently, and I'll be there for a year. But you know, when you're a site engineer, you never have to worry that when one project ends, you're going to be out of the job. You know, most site engineers, like myself, are salaried, and you roll from one contract to another pretty much with no gap in between. You're very rarely needed to relocate massively around the country. Obviously, it's not quite like an office job where you can properly settle down in an area. You know, might have to relocate slightly. But being based down in the southeast where I'm from, obviously everything is so densely populated down there, the chances of there being a site quite close to where I live are pretty high. Which leads me nicely on to what I'll be up to over the summer. Because although Gatwick Airport is fairly near where I live, I think I'd like to be a little bit closer. And I'm sure a lot of people listening will relate to me in the fact that I've really enjoyed the independence I've gained whilst coming to university. And that's not made me in a massive rush to move back in with my parents. I love them very much. But equally, I think that now I've moved out, I wanna make that stick. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that moving back in with my parents is taking a backwards step. But it's certainly not a forward step. So yeah, I think I'll be spending most of the time, as soon as I get down south, trying to find somewhere to live, which is a difficult thing to do in COVID times, but I'm sure I'll manage it and end up living somewhere. I know there are an awful lot of Durham households that pretty much move verbatim from up in Durham, either over to Manchester or down to London or over to Bristol or to one of the cities. It's not quite what I'm going to have planned, but yeah. House hunting and then starting work on August 16th is my start date.
Well, we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
All the best and good luck with that. And how did you find the process of applying to that position then, and indeed to other positions as well?
Get good at filling in forms would be the first. Don't be annoyed about the fact that despite the fact that you've already told them your name and date of birth 84 different times, they will still ask for it at the beginning of every form. Get a good autofiller on your browser to fill in as much of that you can for you. A lot of top tips I give. And then in interviews, any interview tips I give people, just sound interested. They're not looking like, if you're going to do research, don't do research. That's just my advice, but certainly certainly work for me. Don't do research onto what the job is going to be. They'd be like, the first 2 weeks, maybe even more, of any job, they're going to teach you everything you need to do the job. You don't need to know that in the interview. What you need is an interest to do the job and a desire, and also not just for the job, but that specific company. Because certainly in site engineering, there are an awful lot of companies where the job is basically the same, each of them. So for me, it was less sounding interested about the job I was going to do and more sounding interested about why I'd chosen that company. I know it doesn't work in every sector. Like, for example, in finance, they basically expect you to have carpet bombed about 200 applications to different firms. But in engineering, I like to think there is a bit more of a personal touch, you know. So do be interested in the company, do find out what awards they've run recently, and don't be afraid to tell them how brilliant they are for winning those awards. I think any interviewer will surely love being told how good they are at their job. And if you remind them of that, then that's never going to make a bad impression. And that's very much the tone I took in my interview, and it seemed to go pretty well because I'm very lucky to have a job in what is a very, very difficult environment to find one, I think, for a lot of people. So I can be very, very thankful for that.
And finally, if you could give a piece of advice to any of the new or existing students at Durham about anything we've talked about today, what would that piece of advice be?
I think that piece of advice would be is that when you come to university, you have an absolutely golden opportunity, which I can't think of any other time in your life which you get, apart from possibly if you move abroad. You can change yourself to be any person you want to be. I think there are very, very few opportunities where your location, your friendship group, and your job, if you will, as a student, all change at the same time. I can't think of any other period in your life where that's going to happen, which gives you this golden opportunity of, if you didn't very much like the life you were leading at school, if you didn't very much, not necessarily didn't like who you were, but if there are parts of your life that you weren't happy with or wanted to work on, coming to university is the time to do that, you know. And coming to a university which is, broadly speaking, very, very accepting, like Durham. It sounds cheesy to say, doesn't it? But you can be whoever you want to be. Like, when you can't suddenly go over the Christmas holidays at school and come back with completely new hobbies and completely new friends and be a completely different person, because people are going to be like, "Ooh, that's a bit weird, you know, what's happened there?" But you can do that when you come to university. You can go into specialty, you can just be who you want to be. And I'm not saying be someone fake. I'm not saying put on a fake personality. I'm perhaps suggesting that when people are at school, they have developed a bit of a character that isn't really themselves. And that's not a bad thing, because most likely that character started when people were 13 or 14 years old. And by the time they're 17, 18, leaving school, funnily enough, people have changed slightly in that time. You know, I think it's fair to say that I was a very, very different person coming into university than I was at 13 or 14, just purely because I've grown up so much, you know, and I've grown an awful lot since. So I think take that opportunity. Don't necessarily just do all of the things you did at school, but slightly more. You know, have a look around and think, hey, that's cool. I'm gonna start that, decide that, and I'm not gonna come at it like a newbie. I'm gonna do all my research, and I'm gonna get really into it, and I'm not just gonna do it for a week and drop it. You know, I think finding new commitments at university is not something you need to be afraid of just because you didn't do them before, because no one is the finished product when we're all so young. You know, I'm 21 and I certainly still feel like I'm 22 actually, so I certainly feel like a big kid now. So I don't think anyone is the finished product. And I think when you're at university, you have a good opportunity to change it up. You know, everyone's always saying, stay in your lane, you know your niche. And I don't think that's necessarily good advice. Because certainly when you're a young person, maybe when you reach 30, maybe find your niche by then, but certainly you don't need to have found it by this stage. And anyone who's worried about the fact that they don't have enough hobbies or aren't interesting enough, you just haven't got it yet. So keep looking until you find it, because a place like Durham is pretty much the best place to find it. If you go on the DSU website and click the A to Z option, you've got an awful lot of scrolling to do before you get through all of the sports and societies. I believe we're one of the only universities that has to split their freshers' fair across 3 days because we don't have room for all the sports and societies over the one. Don't underestimate how awesome that is. Make the most of it. It's absolutely brilliant.
I think that's a brilliant piece of advice to finish on. Thank you so much for joining us, Sam. We wish you all the best for the future. And thank you to everyone who's been listening. We hope you've really enjoyed this podcast. And as always, be sure to keep an eye on our social media pages for future episodes and for news about our department.
Cheers, Chloe. Bye.